Hello and welcome to my channel, Rhino here. Today I'm looking at a video from Reasonable Faith in which they discuss the moral argument for God's existence. It basically boils down to, my opinion is that objective morality exists, and I will not demonstrate that objective morality exists. And for some reason that I will not even attempt to explain, objective morality requires the existence of a God, therefore God exists, and it is the demonstrably immoral God of the Bible. So let's take a look.
Can you be good without God?
Well, that depends. I mean, in my opinion, it's unlikely that a god or gods exist, so yes, people are good without God all the time. In fact, even people who think they're doing good only because of God are in fact being good without God. Because if God doesn't exist, then your own personal beliefs are irrelevant, so believe in a God all you want, you're still living without it. Now, if you assume for argument's sake that a God does exist, then is it possible to be good without it? Well, that depends on what you mean by the question. For instance, if you mean, is the existence of good possible without God, then that has a totally different answer than, can you behave in a good way while still maintaining the position that no God exists? This is further complicated by the fact that you must first define good. I mean, what does it mean to be good? If it means keeping to a moral code that was set out by God, then no, you can't behave in accordance with a moral code set out by a non-existent being. If God does exist, then yes, you can. It is entirely possible to accidentally behave in accordance with that God's moral code, even without knowing what that code is. But I have a feeling we'll be getting into these points a bit more in depth in a minute, so let's just wait and see what you have to say. Suffice it to say for now that it is more complicated of a question than can be answered with a simple yes or no.
Let's find out. Absolutely astounding. There you have it. Undeniable proof that you can be good without believing in God.
Ah, so you're going the wordplay way. Now, obviously you're going to take this in the direction of saying that his standard of good and bad is instilled in him by God whether he believes in God or not, so he can't be good without God even though he can be good without believing in God. Now, I'd like to know, though, how do you know that God considers rescuing a cat from a tree to be good? There is certainly no clue about that given in the Bible. How do you know that that is God's standard and not just that person's standards? There are plenty of people out there who wouldn't care one whit if the cat stayed stuck in the tree and starved to death. There are plenty of people out there who live in cultures where cats are considered food, so they might save the cat from the tree to cook later.
Cooking with your Asian friends.
Hello, and we're back.
Before cooking your meat, it's important that you...
Breathing.
Shut it off, Snowball, you crazy...
What standard are you using to determine that saving the cat was a morally good act? Do you eat meat? Is killing a cow okay where killing a cat is not? At least that one's set out in the Bible. It's perfectly fine to eat beef, meaning that saving a cow's life is not necessarily a morally good act. What is different about cats?
But wait, the question isn't, can you be good without believing in God? The question is, can you be good without God? See, here's the problem. If there is no God, what basis remains for objective good or bad, right or wrong?
Well, who says that good and bad need to be objective? I mean, back to the cat example, that's clearly subjective. What if the cat was about to pounce on a baby bird? If you stop the cat, it might save the bird, but the cat may starve to death. If you let the cat get to bird, then it gets a meal, but the bird dies. Cats are obligate carnivores, which means that for a cat to live, other animals must die. So where is the objective good in saving a cat from a tree? Or is it perhaps based in the subjective feeling that cats are cute, and it's good to save cute things? Seems that the question of good and evil is a bit more complicated than just declaring a certain act to be objectively, universally good or evil. Almost like there is no objective good or evil, and it's all just subjective. Even if a God exists and decides what is good or evil, that's still subjective to God.
If God does not exist, objective moral values do not exist.
And if God does exist, then objective moral values still don't necessarily exist. It doesn't automatically follow, it needs to be demonstrated, not just asserted.
And here's why. Without some objective reference point, we have no way of saying that something is really up or down.
But what exactly is an objective reference point? I mean, it's easy to see floating in space that you can lose track of up and down, but even on a large scale like the Earth. Up for me is a bit different than up for someone in Australia. I see the star Polaris as up. An Australian observer would see it as down if the Earth wasn't in the way. Reference points for direction aren't universal or objective. They are all subjective. In order to be understood, you have to first figure out what your reference points are. It's the same when floating out in space. It's just easier to see how different perspectives change everything because the scale is at a more personal level.
God's nature provides an objective reference point for moral values.
Okay. Why?
It's the standard against which all actions and decisions are measured.
So, what part of God's nature determines that rescuing cats from trees is objectively good, while at the same time saving the dozens of animals that have to die in order for that cat to live is objectively evil?
But if there's no God, there's no objective reference point.
And that's a problem because reasons?
All we're left with is one person's viewpoint, which is no more valid than anyone else's viewpoint.
Yes, that is pretty much it. Except we have evolved to mostly have similar moral system as others of our own species. This is something that helps with social species and has been observed in several other animal species. Of course, there are differences of opinion, but since we are social creatures who want to live with others of our species, we all have to compromise on some things in order to fit in better. For instance, I'm not going to accuse you of this because I don't know your actual viewpoint, but Kent Hovind is in favor of the death penalty for people who happen to be gay. But he doesn't kill people who are gay because he wants to live freely in society. So he has compromised on his view of what is right and wrong for the sake of living with other people. This is how societies work.
This kind of morality is subjective, not objective.
Correct. As in, it is determined by what subject you happen to be studying at the moment. If you add God into the equation, you don't suddenly make all morality objective, you just make God the subject and suggest that all of human morality is subject to God. You have yet to demonstrate that objective morality even can exist. Now, I think the cat example makes it pretty obvious that what is morally good for one being is not automatically morally good for all beings.
It's like a preference for strawberry ice cream. The preference is in the subject, not the object. So it doesn't apply to other people.
But in the case of flavors, we can determine which flavors are better based on which are more popular. This also doesn't make the better flavor objectively better, but subjectively better by consensus. This is also how morality works. There are entire cultures of people who don't understand why we consider eating cats and dogs to be bad.
Barbecuing with your Asian friends.
Hello?
Turn on your barbecue, then you heat your grill.
Then you get your dog.
Exactly. No, man, no, stop it!
Because to them, they're just food. Which one is objectively right? I would suggest that neither are. Same goes for larger decisions. Take killing, for instance. Is killing another human being objectively right or objectively wrong? If morality is objective, then circumstances shouldn't matter. It's either right or wrong. So which is it? Wrong? What if the person you kill was about to rape and murder someone else? Would defending that person from attack justify killing the attacker? What about war? If a soldier kills an enemy soldier, was that right or wrong? Let's add to that one. Both soldiers are conscripts fighting because they have no choice. They don't care about the overall objective of the war, they just want to survive it to see their families again. Soldier A is aiming at Soldier B's head. Should Soldier B kill Soldier A to prevent himself from being killed? Is that morally right or wrong? Seems morality isn't quite as black and white as some people would try to suggest.
In the same way, subjective morality applies only to the subject.
Applies only to the subject, or is perceived as morality with reference to the subject? As in, can subjective morality only be found in actions directed at a subject and thereby applied to them, or is it found in the way that the subject perceives things? Because if it's the former and only things applied to the subject, then nothing the subject does to other things could be considered immoral by subjective morality, only things done to the subject. As in, our subject is free to kill, steal, rape, plunder, what have you, and nothing is right or wrong until someone does something to the subject. This actually sounds like a lot of people's defense of God's immoral acts in the Bible. I mean, if morality is subjective with reference to God, with God being the subject, then using this explanation, anything our subject does to others is neither moral nor immoral. The only things that are moral or immoral in this framework are things that are done to the subject, including offending our subject by saying his name the wrong way. Jesus Christ, it's all starting to come clear now. Still doesn't make any sense, but at least I can understand how you get to some of these weird conclusions now.
It's not valid or binding for anyone else. So, in a world without God, there can be no evil and no good. Nothing but blind, pitiless indifference.
Ooh, nothing like a good quote mine. Let's see that in context, shall we? The total amount of suffering per year in the natural world is beyond all decent contemplation. During the minute that it takes me to compose the sentence, thousands of animals are being eaten alive, many others are running for their lives, whimpering with fear. Others are slowly being devoured from within by rasping parasites. Thousands of all kinds are dying of starvation, thirst, and disease. It must be so. If there ever is a time of plenty, this very fact will automatically lead to an increase in the population until the natural state of starvation and misery is restored. In a universe of electrons and selfish genes, blind physical forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt, other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason in it, nor any justice. The universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference. That's from River Out of Eden, a Darwinian view of life. It's a bit lengthy, but I think it makes a good point. It appears, if you look at the universe as a whole, that there does not seem to be any sort of benevolent force deciding that certain things are good and others are bad. It appears as though there is no rhyme or reason to which animals suffer, and which enjoy the lap of luxury. And there can be seen no universal force guiding things toward good and away from evil, but rather the natural tendencies towards greater overall suffering. So it doesn't really seem to be that he's suggesting that there is, in fact, no good or evil, but rather that there is no overarching universal good or evil, just the good or evil that exists relative to certain subjects. In other words, subjective good or evil.
God has expressed his moral nature to us as commands.
I can't wait to see the "thou shalt rescue thine kitties" command.
These provide the basis for moral duties. For example, God's essential attribute of love is expressed in his command,
I know! His command to kill all the Amalekites, their children, babies, and livestock. Or wait, maybe it's in his command to hate your entire family. It could be either. Who can tell?
to love your neighbor as yourself.
Aw, that's boring.
This command provides a foundation upon which we can affirm the objective goodness of generosity, self-sacrifice, and equality.
But how are those objective? I mean, if you're generous to one person, then by the very nature of our limited reality, you must be less generous to another person. If I give all of my money to the homeless guy in the street, then I lose my home for lack of being able to pay for it. And so that is less generous to my family. If I give some money to a hurricane victim, then that was money that I cannot now give to an earthquake victim. Any act of generosity can be flipped around to ultimately be a decision not to be generous to a different person. That's hardly objective. Self-sacrifice, why is that good? Is it objective? What are you sacrificing for? There were many people who sacrificed their lives for the cause of fascism, communism, and Nazism in World War II. Were those objectively moral acts? There are people who sacrifice their time for causes like white supremacy. Is that objectively moral? It is self-sacrifice, is it not? And as for equality, the Bible just flat out doesn't teach equality. Women must obey the men, or at the very least aren't allowed to teach. Slaves must obey their masters. Hebrews are not allowed to be kept as slaves, but people from other nations are. That doesn't sound like equality. And equality to what? Equality in itself is not an absolute measure. It is relative. Equal income, equal rights, equal status, equal opportunity. Which equality is universally good, and how should we strive for that equality? I mean, a paraplegic will never have the opportunity to play in the NBA, so should we make sure everyone is paraplegic in order to equalize opportunity? I'm afraid that none of your qualities here are universally good, despite sounding superficially good.
And we can condemn as objectively evil greed, abuse, and discrimination.
Again, superficially, I might be tempted to agree with that, but thinking about it for a second, greed is responsible for people wanting to have better lives, which is basically responsible for every human invention, ever. Why waste my time trying to find a better, easier way of doing something that everyone needs to do? So I can sell the idea and make money, or at the very minimum, so I can be greedy with my time and have an easier go of it myself. Now, abuse, I would consider killing to be a form of abuse, but as I pointed out earlier, in order for some things to live, other things must die. What about something like rape? Yeah, I would agree that there isn't exactly a time or place for where rape could be considered good, but does that mean it's objectively bad? Well, let's consider, why do we think of rape as bad? Because we have empathy. We know that it's a violation and that we do not want that kind of violation to happen to us. So we can understand, at least to a degree, how horrible it must feel for the person who experienced it. As in, it is based subjectively on the experiences of the subject. And as for discrimination, the obvious go-to is racial or gender discrimination, which is tolerated at best and encouraged at worst in the Bible, so you can't say that it is objectively bad without saying that the Bible is wrong in certain aspects. Another facet of discrimination, though, would be professional discrimination. I am glad that not just any old Joe can start practicing medicine and calling themselves doctors. There is discrimination about who is allowed to call themselves a doctor and practice medicine, and for good reason. And I discriminate when I call someone to install, say, a new circuit on my breaker panel. I want someone who has gone through the hoops that it takes to become an electrician. I'm not just going to give the job to anyone who wants money. So it seems that discrimination can be good in some circumstances, making it subjective rather than objective.
This raises a problem. Is something good just because God wills it, or does God will something because it is good?
Third option, neither. Something is good if it fits our human definition of good, which can actually change quite a bit from person to person. A vegetarian would probably not agree with me that the death of the cow for my nice juicy T-bone steak is a good thing, but I will eat it and pronounce it to be good. A vegan will disagree with a vegetarian about their decision to eat eggplant parmesan, suggesting that keeping cows from milk is evil. Are any of these things objectively good or evil? No. They are good or evil depending on the subject.
The answer is neither one.
Hey, we agreed! This probably won't last long.
Rather, God wills something because He is good.
And there goes the agreement. You still haven't demonstrated either the existence of a God or an objective morality. Work on those first before you claim that God is objective morality.
God is the standard of moral values, just as a live musical performance is the standard for a high-fidelity recording.
Whoa, that's a bit off. I don't think auto-tune would have ever been invented if the goal was to make them sound like they were performing live. In recording music, the objective is to sound as good as possible, not to sound as close to live as possible.
Without your love.
The more a recording sounds like the original, the better it is.
Not necessarily. I mean, that depends on your goal with the recording. You might say that it's subjective. If you're aiming for an exact reproduction of the original, then yes. But if you're aiming for the most pleasant thing to listen to, then you might do things a bit differently. I know when I record my voice, I am not trying to get it to sound exactly like it sounds when I record. I edit out when I stumble over words. I use noise removal. I try to keep the gain low and speak as close to the microphone as I can so that you can't hear that I have the dishwasher running. But at the same time, I try to speak far enough back that you don't get the sounds. Sorry about that. My bad. Anyways, where was I? Yeah, sometimes I want some noises other than my voice, though, like when I poured the rum in my AMA video. I changed the setting on my microphone to allow it to pick up the sound of me opening and pouring the rum, and even amplified those sounds in post to make them stand out more, because that's what I subjectively wanted. So yeah, you're using a bad analogy with this whole recording thing. Either that or it's a decent analogy, and morality is subjective.
Likewise, the more closely a moral action conforms to God's nature, the better it is.
So God, by nature, according to the Bible, is jealous. Does that mean that jealousy is always a good trait? My wife is out with a friend as I record this. Should I be jealous that someone else is spending time with her and maybe lock her up to prevent it? Should I be jealous that my neighbor has a nicer car than me? Should I be jealous that all my cat has to do is sleep all day while I have to work? That would put me closer to God's nature according to what the Bible says about his nature, so that must be good. And that's not even getting to his more nasty character traits like his anger management issues and genocidal tendencies.
But if atheism is true, there is no ultimate standard.
And if Christianity is true, and the God of the Bible is the ultimate standard, then the ultimate standard is pretty morally reprehensible. Wait a minute. If God is the ultimate moral standard, how would it even be possible for me to consider his actions to be morally wrong? Shouldn't his morality be written on my heart or something? In fact, most people I know, Christian or otherwise, think that genocide is wrong. Yet the Christian God has committed genocide. So if he is the moral standard, then genocide must be right. How can Christians disagree with what God has declared by his actions to be morally right if they believe God to be the ultimate moral standard? Or is genocide only acceptable in certain circumstances, making it morally relative? But I thought morality was objective and absolute. You know, the more I think about it, the less sense objective morality makes.
So there can be no moral obligations or duties. Who or what lays such duties upon us?
Who said that there has to be someone laying moral duties upon us? I mean, different people have different ideas about what their moral obligations are. Some people would jump on a grenade to save their comrades. Others would run away and try to save themselves and wouldn't feel they had done anything wrong. I would even go so far as to agree that someone diving away from a grenade to save themselves is not actually doing anything wrong, even though I still admire someone who is brave enough to jump on the grenade to save the others. Why do some people feel it's their moral obligation to save others while other people do not? Could it be that there isn't anyone laying moral duties upon us and that we decide for ourselves based on our genetics and our life experiences?
No one. Remember, for the atheist, humans are just accidents of nature.
Well, I wouldn't say accidents. The word accident implies that there was an intent, and things happened contrary to the intention, which is actually kind of in line with the biblical story. But yeah, we are the product of natural phenomena.
Highly evolved animals. But animals have no moral obligations to one another.
You say that as if it's been settled and is 100% certain. I'll leave a link to an article that asks the question of whether or not animals have morality, but it basically boils down to this. Most mammals behave in a way that at least appears moral. For example, there are instances of monkeys refusing to administer electric shocks to other monkeys even if they get a treat for it. Chimps will punish other chimps who violate certain social rules. There's an instance of a dog risking its life dodging traffic to drag another unconscious dog off a highway in Chile. So clearly animals are able to behave morally. It just boils down to a question of whether or not they arrive to their moral decisions by reasoning them out or through instinct. I think there are enough examples of animals behaving in a moral way towards animals of other species to support the idea that there's at least a rudimentary level of reasoning going on. So if animals have no moral obligations, why do so many of them behave in a moral way?
When a cat kills a mouse, it hasn't done anything morally wrong. The cat's just being a cat.
So does the same logic apply to a human killing a cow for food, or are you suggesting that killing another animal is always morally wrong, but animals don't really have the ability to think about it? I mean, there is a chance that you're a vegetarian, so you would say that killing a cow for food is wrong, but the Bible is full of examples of people burning animal corpses for no reason other than God liking the smell or something, so you can't claim that that particular moral decision comes from God.
If God doesn't exist, we should view human behavior in the same way. No action should be considered morally right or wrong.
Your example was of a cat eating a mouse for food, so one species of animal killing another species of animal for food. The headline you put up says, "Man kills child." If you want it to be equivalent, then you should have the cat killing a kitten rather than a mouse, or change the headline to "Man kills cow." You'll notice that for most people, killing a cow is nowhere near as bad morally as killing a child, and that includes vegetarians and vegans who do consider killing cows to be morally wrong. Do you have any idea why this is? It's because empathy for one's own species will tend to help that species survive, so it is a trait that shows up quite frequently in the animal kingdom. But that's all beside the point. It's not that no action is right or wrong, it's that an action can increase or decrease the amount of suffering in the world. Speaking purely from a human perspective, we can judge actions accordingly. Killing a child will increase suffering quite a bit, while giving to charity will decrease suffering. Now, this isn't a perfect method for deciding how moral or immoral something is, but it's a lot better than, "This is moral because this old Bronze Age book says so." Especially when this old Bronze Age book recommends things like killing people for working on the wrong day of the week, or killing disobedient children, or killing homosexuals, or killing women who had sex before getting married. Man, there's a lot of killing over trivial crap in this moral book, isn't there? I wonder what the punishment is for raping someone. Seems to depend on the situation, like as if it's relative. If a man rapes a woman in town, then both the rapist and his victim are to be killed. Yeah, sounds fair. If he rapes her in the country, then only he gets killed. Sure. And both of those are only applied to if the woman is pledged to be married. If she isn't, then they both get to live happily ever after with each other. Well, that's nice. Sure sounds moral to me. And notably absent are the rules about what to do if a married woman is raped. As if anyone would bother raping a woman who's already been had by another man. Everyone knows that a woman has lost all her value after she has sex for the first time.
But the problem is, good and bad, right and wrong, do exist.
They exist subjectively to us. The universe itself doesn't have a sense of right or wrong. A planet orbiting a star is neither right nor wrong. In order for something to be moral or immoral, there must be intent. So naturally, until there are creatures capable of having intentions, there is no right or wrong. But we do have intentions, and as such, our actions can now have a moral aspect to them.
Just as our sense experience convinces us that the physical world is objectively real.
The difference being that the existence of the universe is independent of our existence, whereas human morality is completely dependent on the existence of human beings.
Our moral experience convinces us that moral values are objectively real.
You still haven't done anything to demonstrate that, though. You just keep asserting it.
Every time you say, "Hey, that's not fair, that's wrong, that's an injustice," you affirm your belief in the existence of objective morals.
Or you affirm your belief in the fact that you don't want people to do things to you that you don't like, and through empathy you can extend these feelings to others who are in situations that you wouldn't want to be in yourself. Nothing objective about it.
We're well aware that child abuse, racial discrimination, and terrorism are wrong. For everybody. Always.
Well, obviously not everyone thinks these things are wrong, or people wouldn't do them. I mean, I think from an evolutionary perspective, it's easy to see why child abuse is hardwired into most of us to be considered wrong. Protect the offspring and the genetic line continues, easy as that. As far as racial discrimination goes, it's only fairly recently that this has been considered universally wrong. Evolutionarily speaking, racial discrimination is beneficial to our selfish genes, as it essentially uses tribalism to promote the genes of a specific group of people over those of another group. But in recent years, as globalization increases, we have come to realize that these people who look so very differently from us are actually quite similar to us in all the ways that matter. So we have used reason and rationality to overturn a moral code that was brought about by natural selection. And as far as terrorism is concerned, again, I would like to point out that the people committing acts of terrorism believe very firmly that they are morally correct. Those of us who see it as immoral do so in light of the fact that it increases suffering, and we don't want to live in a world where we might be killed while going about our normal everyday life. These all seem to me to be subjective reasons for moral behavior, not objective ones.
Is this just a personal preference or opinion?
Yes, the majority of us in society feel that these things are wrong. There is a minority who feel that those things are right, or at the very least morally neutral, but because those people are in the minority, these things are generally agreed upon to be wrong. Is it wrong for a fish to eat its own young? I'd say that for a human to eat a baby is wrong, but is it wrong for a fish to do it? If it is wrong, then fish are moral agents who have the ability to decide what is right and wrong. If it is not wrong, then killing your own offspring is not objectively wrong because it depends upon the subject. In other words, it's subjective.
No. The man who says that it is morally acceptable to rape little children is just as mistaken as the man who says 2 + 2 = 5.
That quote is a bit harder to find in context without going and reading the whole book that it's from, but it seems to be a Christian apologetic favorite, which makes me think that it is, again, taken out of context. Even so, there are atheists out there who will argue the case for objective morality. You don't have to believe that the source of objective morality is a god in order to believe that morals are objective. So all you're really doing here is saying, hey, this atheist believes in objective morality. That does nothing for your point. That would be like me saying, hey, this Christian believes in evolution, therefore there is no God. There are plenty of Christians who have made evolution work within the terms of their faith, just as there are many atheists who have found ways to argue in favor of objective morality within an atheistic framework.
What all this amounts to, then, is a moral argument for the existence of God. If God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist.
And if God does exist, objective moral values and duties do not then automatically exist. Also, objective moral values and duties have not been demonstrated to exist. And if they were to be demonstrated, it does not automatically follow then that they have to come from a god.
But objective moral values and duties do exist.
Debatable. Definitely not demonstrated in this video.
Therefore, God exists.
Well, Premise 1 is flawed and has not been successfully demonstrated. Premise 2 is highly debatable and has also not been demonstrated. So the jump to a conclusion there was a bit hasty, I think. Well, that's it for this video. Remember to follow me on Twitter and support me on Patreon. See you next time! Wait a minute. If God is the ultimate moral standard, how would it even be possible for me to consider his actions to be morally wrong?